It began with a name that no official report wanted to repeat. Not in documents, not in press briefings, not in internal briefings either. But among deployed troops stationed at a remote and classified location, the name spread quickly, quietly at first, then with increasing certainty. They called it the Box Witch. At first it sounded like nothing more than military slang. Soldiers often give strange nicknames to unfamiliar equipment, abandoned structures, or unexplained environmental phenomena. It helps reduce fear. It turns the unknown into something manageable. But in this case, the nickname did not disappear. It spread, from one unit to another, from one shift to the next, until eventually, even those who refused to believe in rumors found themselves using the same name, the Box Witch. No one could agree on when it started. Some said it began during a night patrol. Others claimed it was first mentioned after a communications blackout. A few insisted it had been there long before any of them arrived. What they all agreed on was simple. Something in the field was wrong. The site itself was never officially described in detail. Troops rotated in and out under strict confidentiality orders. Maps were restricted. Coordinates were redacted. Even the weather reports were generalized to broad regional summaries. But soldiers knew enough to understand one thing. They were not stationed there for routine operations. The terrain was harsh. Flat in some areas, broken and uneven in others. Long stretches of silence separated observation points. At night, the horizon disappeared completely, as if the land itself swallowed light. And in the middle of this landscape sat the object. At first glance, it was nothing extraordinary. A structure, rectangular, old, weathered by time and exposure. It resembled a container, though no one could confirm its origin. It had no visible markings, no doors that behaved like doors should, no windows in the traditional sense, just surfaces. Flat, dark, and slightly reflective under moonlight. It was large enough to be noticed immediately, but not large enough to explain the unease it caused. According to the earliest internal accounts, the first unit assigned to the area did not mention anything unusual at all. Their initial reports described stable environmental conditions. No hostile activity, no structural anomalies of concern. Everything appeared routine, but that changed after the first week. A patrol unit reportedly noticed something during a night shift. They observed faint movement near the structure. Not mechanical movement, not animal movement, something else. One soldier later described it as like the surface was adjusting itself when we weren't looking directly at it. That statement was never officially recorded in detail. It was summarized, reviewed, and ultimately classified under environmental misinterpretation. But the story did not end there, because more reports followed. Within days, multiple soldiers began reporting an unusual auditory phenomenon. It was not loud, it was not constant, it came in irregular intervals. Sometimes during quiet nights, sometimes during radio silence. A low frequency sound, not mechanical, not natural, not easily describable. Some said it resembled distant static. Others said it felt more than it sounded, like pressure in the air rather than noise itself. One report described it as like something thinking slowly inside metal. That description was never included in official documentation, but it spread informally among personnel. And with it, the name began to take shape, the Box Witch. Military nicknames usually emerge from humor or convenience, but this one was different. It did not begin as a joke. It began as a coping mechanism. One unit reportedly referred to the structure as the box, simply to avoid discussing its details. Then, during a night shift, a soldier allegedly said he saw movement in the shadows around it. Another responded half-jokingly, "Stop staring at it like that. You'll wake the Box Witch." The phrase stuck, not because it was funny, but because it felt appropriate in a way no one wanted to explain. Within a week, Box Witch was being used in casual conversation. Within a month, it had reached command-level awareness. But no one officially adopted the term. It remained unofficial, unwritten, unacknowledged, yet widely understood. The surveillance problem. As concern grew, surveillance equipment was installed around the structure. Multiple camera systems were deployed, motion sensors, thermal imaging, infrared monitoring, everything standard for remote observation. At first, nothing unusual appeared. The structure remained still, unchanging, unresponsive. But then inconsistencies began to appear in the recorded data. Not dramatic anomalies, subtle ones. Frames that did not align perfectly. Audio channels that contained brief distortions. Thermal readings that fluctuated without environmental cause. Each incident was small, individually dismissible, but collectively unsettling. One technician reviewing footage noted something concerning. There are moments where the object seems less defined in the recording than in real observation. That statement triggered additional review protocols. However, no hardware malfunction was confirmed. The event that escalated everything occurred during a routine overnight cycle. Communication systems across multiple units experienced temporary disruption. Not a complete blackout, but partial signal loss. Radio transmissions became unstable. Data feeds lagged. External communication channels degraded. At the same time, personnel on site reported increased environmental silence. One soldier described it as, "Even the wind stopped behaving normally. During this period, surveillance systems captured something unexpected. The structure appeared to exhibit a subtle change in surface reflection. Not movement in a physical sense, but a distortion, as if the material was not fully consistent. Some analysts suggested atmospheric interference, others suggested sensor error. Then everything returned to normal." But after that night, morale shifted. People stopped referring to it as just the box. They began saying the full term more frequently, the box witch. As time passed, commanders noticed subtle changes in behavior among deployed troops. Nothing severe, but noticeable. Increased reluctance to approach the structure. Avoidance of certain patrol routes, reluctance to remain alone during night shifts. Some personnel requested transfers without providing clear reasons. Officially, these were attributed to stress, isolation, and environmental fatigue. Unofficially, something else was being discussed. A growing sense of unease that could not be easily articulated. One senior officer summarized it cautiously. "There is no confirmed threat, but there is a consistent discomfort among personnel that we cannot ignore." The most significant incident occurred during a scheduled inspection cycle. A 2-person team was assigned to conduct a close-range visual survey of the structure. Standard procedure, document condition, check for physical degradation, report anomalies. The team approached at dawn. Visibility was clear, conditions stable. According to the report, everything appeared normal at distance, but as they closed in, communication between the two individuals became irregular. Radio check-ins were delayed. Responses became shorter. Then, at approximately mid-range distance, one of the radios transmitted a single message. "It's not staying still when we're not looking at it." No further clarification followed. The team returned earlier than scheduled. Their formal report contained no mention of the statement, but the audio log preserved it. That recording was later flagged for review and placed under restricted analysis. By this point, 3 things were clear to everyone stationed in the area. The structure existed physically and could be observed instruments. Sometimes recorded inconsistencies around it. Personnel consistently reported psychological discomfort near it. But one question remained unanswered. What exactly was the box witch? No scientific classification could fully explain it. No engineering model matched its behavior. No historical record identified its origin. And no authority was willing to publicly address it. The official stance remained unchanged. Further investigation required. No immediate threat confirmed. But among the troops, certainty was growing. Whatever it was, it did not behave like anything they had been trained to understand, and it was not finished revealing itself. Because soon the structure would respond in a way that no one expected, and everything they believed about it would begin to change. The soldiers stationed at a remote classified site began reporting strange and unexplainable behavior from a mysterious structure they simply called the Box Witch. What started as quiet rumors had already grown into something more serious, not officially acknowledged, not publicly discussed, but impossible to ignore among those who had seen it firsthand. Now in part 2, the situation escalates beyond observation. Because the structure was no longer just being watched, it was starting to react. The turning point came during a routine overnight surveillance cycle. At exactly 02:14 hours, multiple systems recorded a synchronized anomaly, not just one camera, not just one sensor, but every monitoring device in the perimeter network. Thermal feeds fluctuated, audio channels distorted, motion tracking briefly failed. At the same time, personnel stationed at different observation points reported the same sensation, a feeling that the structure was aware. One operator described it in an internal debrief. "It didn't look different, but it felt like it noticed us." That statement was never intended for official documentation, but it was recorded in supplementary logs and later flagged as significant. Because shortly after the anomaly, surveillance footage showed something unusual. The surface of the structure appeared to shift in reflection patterns, not moving like machinery, not cracking like stone, but subtly altering its visual consistency, as if the object's surface was being perceived differently depending on the observer's focus. Analysts reviewing the footage could not agree on what they were seeing. Some argued it was compression distortion, others suggested environmental interference. But a small group of technicians noted something concerning. The distortion only appeared when human observers were actively watching live feeds. Within days, a pattern emerged. When no personnel were actively monitoring the structure in real time, recorded data appeared stable. But when live observation was initiated, anomalies increased. This led to an internal term used informally by technicians, the attention effect. In Tiros, it described the apparent correlation between human focus and irregular system behavior. One engineer summarized it cautiously. "It behaves differently when it knows it is being observed." This statement triggered immediate review because it implied something unusual, not just a mechanical anomaly, but a responsive system. Command staff ordered stricter protocols. Observation shifts were reduced. Personnel were instructed to avoid prolonged visual monitoring. Yet despite reduced attention, incidents continued. The most widely discussed event among troops occurred during a night patrol rotation. A 3-person unit was assigned to perimeter movement control, standard procedure. No deviation expected. At approximately 01:40 hours, the team reported visual contact with the structure. According to their initial report, everything appeared normal. No movement, no sound, no visible change. But as they continued their route, one member stopped unexpectedly. He reportedly stared directly at the structure for several seconds, then spoke into his radio. It's not just sitting there, it's waiting. The transmission ended abruptly. When backup communication was attempted, there was no response for nearly 90 seconds. After contact resumed, the tone of the report changed significantly. The team requested immediate return to base. No explanation was given in real time. However, later debriefing revealed something more disturbing. All 3 members independently reported a shared perception that the structure had shifted position slightly when they were not looking at it directly. This claim could not be verified through physical measurement, but the consistency of their accounts caused concern. As incidents increased, opinion among station personnel began to split. 2 broad groups formed informally. The first group insisted the structure was an environmental anomaly, possibly geological, possibly atmospheric, possibly a malfunctioning industrial remnant. The second group disagreed. They believed the structure demonstrated behavior that could not be explained by conventional science. Not because it moved, but because it reacted. One senior technician summarized the divide. We are either dealing with faulty perception or something that interacts with perception itself. That statement was never officially adopted, but it circulated widely within internal communication channels. Morale began to shift. Confidence in standard procedures weakened, and the nickname the box switch became more frequently used, even in formal discussions when officers were not present. A major escalation occurred during a scheduled calibration of perimeter systems. Technicians deployed multiple sensor arrays to verify environmental consistency. For the first time since monitoring began, all systems were synchronized. Thermal, optical, seismic, and electromagnetic data were aligned. At first, everything appeared stable. Then, without warning, all sensor feeds simultaneously registered a sharp anomaly spike. Duration, less than 3 seconds, but significant enough to trigger automatic safety protocols. What made the event unusual was not the spike itself, it was the inconsistency in recovery. Some systems returned to normal immediately, others lagged. A few recorded residual distortion patterns that did not match any known environmental cause. One technician reviewing the logs later said, "It looked like the system forgot what it was supposed to be measuring." That statement led to further analysis, but no clear explanation was found. Following the sensor failure event, an unusual phase began. For nearly 48 hours, no anomalies were recorded, no distortions, no unusual sounds, no sensor irregularities. Everything appeared normal. At first, this was interpreted as stabilization. However, experienced personnel described it differently. They did not feel relief, they felt anticipation. One soldier described it as, it was too quiet, like something had stopped responding, not stopped existing. This perception would later prove significant, because at the end of the silence period, the most important event yet occurred. At 03:06 hours, surveillance cameras captured a subtle change. The structure's surface reflection began to behave inconsistently across different camera angles. From one position, it appeared flat. From another, slightly distorted. From a third, briefly undefined. Operators initially assumed lens calibration issues, but when cross-checked across multiple independent systems, the inconsistency remained. Then, something more unusual occurred. For approximately 11 seconds, all recorded footage from different devices showed slightly different versions of the same structure. Not dramatically different, but enough to suggest instability in visual representation. This triggered immediate system lockdown protocols. However, by the time intervention teams arrived, everything had returned to baseline. The structure appeared unchanged, still, silent, unresponsive, but now no one believed it was passive. After the reflection incident, behavioral changes among personnel intensified. Sleep disruption increased. Stress indicators rose. Communication between units became more cautious. But the most significant change was not physical, it was psychological interpretation. More personnel began reporting the same phrase independently. It feels like it is aware we are thinking about it. This was not included in official incident logs, but it appeared repeatedly in informal reports and debrief conversations. Command staff grew increasingly concerned, because even without physical escalation, psychological impact was spreading, and in operational environments, perception itself becomes a factor of stability. At this stage, command made a critical decision. Observation would be increased, not decreased. The reasoning was simple. If the structure responded to attention, then understanding that response required sustained monitoring. A dedicated observation cycle was established, multiple shifts, continuous live feeds, redundant recording systems. But this decision would soon produce the most alarming development yet, because once observation intensity increased, the structure stopped behaving like an anomaly and began behaving like a presence, not reacting randomly, not fluctuating inconsistently, but responding in structured patterns, as if establishing communication. Analysts reviewing continuous data noticed something subtle. The anomalies were no longer random. They followed intervals, repeating cycles, consistent timing variations. At first, these patterns were dismissed as coincidence, but statistical modeling revealed otherwise. The probability of such structured repetition occurring naturally was extremely low. One analyst summarized the finding: "It is not random anymore, it is structured. We just don't understand the structure." This realization changed everything, because if the behavior was structured, it suggested intent, and intent suggested agency. And agency suggested something far more complex than previously assumed. All monitoring systems were active, all personnel were on alert, and for the first time since deployment began, the structure did something it had never done before. It remained completely still for exactly 117 seconds. Then every sensor simultaneously recorded a single synchronized event. A full system distortion spike, not localized, not partial, but total. And in that moment, every live feed displayed the same final frame. The structure, perfectly centered, completely stable, and subtly different in appearance, not physically changed, but perceptually inconsistent, as if it was no longer agreeing with how it should be seen. Then all feeds cut simultaneously. When systems recovered, the structure was unchanged. But every recording device showed the same timestamp gap. Exactly 117 seconds unaccounted for. No explanation, no data, no recovery logs, only silence. And that silence would not last long. Because whatever the box witch was, it had just demonstrated that it could control not just perception, but time inside observation itself.